Coming up today, an extended conversation with a man who can tell us the real story behind Apple VoiceOver.
You're listening to Double Tap, your daily accessible technology show. Now, here's your hosts, Stephen Scott and Shaun Preece.
Now, Shaun, when we talk about accessibility, we often immediately think as blind people, I think about the iPhone and how accessible it is, how accessible it became. Not initially, but it did get there. It did get VoiceOver for us blind people. And then, of course, every product that followed, and even up till today, we think about when an Apple product's released, that we're going to be able to use it. Like the Vision Pro came out, and instantly we were talking about how we could use it. We weren't even thinking about the fact this was a visual first product. We just knew that Apple would build in accessibility as at the core, get it, of Apple.
Oh, well done. That's very clever. Yeah, we do. We assume accessibility. And in a lot of cases, it would be, stupid to think that. But in the case of Apple, usually it's fine. You can assume accessibility is there.
And one man who certainly knows all about that, because he was right there at the very beginning, and actually was one of the main people involved in bringing VoiceOver to life. Can't believe he's on our show. Mike Shebanek is here with us on Double Tap, now at Be My Eyes. Mike, great to have you on Double Tap.
Well, thanks for having me. Really great to be with you.
Yeah, this
feels
is
like we're not worthy. We're not worthy.
We're not worthy. We're not worthy.
The God.
Oh, yes, you are, for sure.
Right, Shaun, dive in. I know you've got questions. I have many, but I'll let you go first.
Okay, the thing is, there's just so many different things we could talk about with you because your background is absolutely amazing. So maybe we should just start there and just give us as brief as you can, I know, because it's extensive, but give us a history of what you've done.
Oh, my goodness. Well, I've been at this a long time. I started out as a in a university environment when I just got out of school and just sort of did IT kinds of things, did consulting and teaching and training and writing of documentation. I really just tried to build up a skill set that would help me later, not knowing what my career would end up being. And then later, of course, I ended up joining Apple. I had always wanted to be a product manager, but started out really in like a technical sales role. So I was in the field and working with clients and universities and things. But at Apple, eventually I kind of landed at the right place at the right time. The kind of backstory to how I kind of stayed through the transition. I remember Apple at one point was really famous and then was really broke. And so I was there in the really broke part. People were thinking, why would you go to this company? I mean, they're in real trouble. But I just wanted a chance, right? I think everybody when they're young just wants a chance. And so I ended up becoming the product manager of the original iMac. And that was a time when Steve had just returned to Apple. The company needed a really kind of big hit product. And I just happened into that spot. There's a whole backstory to that, probably too long to tell here. But and so I ended up learning so many of my foundational lessons about quality and being user-centric and breaking the rules and doing things that are different and launching new technology people hadn't really experienced before in that product. I was actually the USB product manager at that time as well. And of course, now we use USB for everything, but back then nobody knew what it was. So that was an interesting kind of moment as well. But eventually ended up in about 5 years running, the iMac group and as a product manager, and eventually ended up transitioning to the software side of the house, which was really unusual at that time. We were changing the processors in our computers from PowerPC processors to Intel processors. And of course, now Apple's on M1 and their new silicon. But back then that was a big deal. And most companies who tried to do that kind of went broke. So it was a big gamble, but I really wanted to take on that project. We did that, so I ended up becoming the product manager of Rosetta. But that landed me in the software side of the house. So suddenly I'm working on things like software update and dashboard, boot camp, Rosetta. I was an OS 10 product manager. And so I was doing all kinds of interesting things. And that's how I kind of got connected to the VoiceOver project, because it was a software problem and it came to me and I was in that right place at the right time doing that work. So that's sort of my story at Apple. Of course, I've had careers at Yahoo and Verizon Media, starting things like the Disability Collection with Getty Images to create stock image libraries that were more representative of people with disabilities. I did things like build accessibility labs at Yahoo where people could experience AT for the first time. Maybe they'd never experienced it before, but in actually like a working, good environment where things actually perform the way they should. So people knew what to build for and how to design well. So there's a whole long history of some other projects too, but We can stick up with Apple if you want.
Yeah, well, I mean, look, there's a lot to talk about because, of course, Facebook as well. Most recently, you were there at Meta. There's lots to dive into here. I want to take you back to the moment with VoiceOver, because there's been a debate raging, almost like it's almost become an urban myth about how VoiceOver, how accessibility perhaps came to be. I mean, a huge milestone next year for accessibility at Apple, charting 40 years of accessibility, which is kind of amazing. But, when we think about VoiceOver particularly, because we're very selfish here at Double Tap, we talk about blind people. And,
yes.
We think about VoiceOver and we think about accessibility. There was always a bit of an urban myth about how it came about. How it
Stevie
came
Wonder did
to
it.
be. Yeah, it was all Stevie Wonder, or was it the
NFB?
National Federation of the Blind? There was lots of bringing a lawsuit because, iTunes U material wasn't accessible. There was lots of rumors flying around as to why. Not just VoiceOver was created, or indeed any accessibility was created, but why it was decided essentially to become a core component of every Apple product from then on in, because that was very unusual at that time. Can you shed any light on this for us?
Yeah, and of course you can imagine it almost didn't come to be. I think that's what makes the story so fascinating. So,
Okay.
As I said, I was in product management. I'm in the software side of the house. My manager walks in and says, "Hey, I have a problem for you to solve. Probably take a couple weeks." A couple weeks. Okay, great. Well, I'm still at it, 20, 30 years later. So we knew that wasn't true. He didn't tell me that, thankfully. But it was basically a situation where Apple had a customer, the state of Maine, where Mac computers were provided for all the students there. And you can imagine there were students who were blind and they wanted to use the same computer that everybody else in that state was using. And they couldn't. At that time, there wasn't a solution. There wasn't a screen reader for the Mac. Mac had moved from sort of the old classic OS to the new modern Mac OS 10. And of course, now we have all the new versions. But during the transition, the screen reader that did exist went away. And so it came to me to sort of figure out, what should we do about this? Should we go get somebody to make one? Should we license something? Should we build something and sell it? There's a whole bunch of ideas here. And as a product manager, that's my job, is to figure out what are all the possibilities and then come back with the best solution. And at one point, I ended up having to present this to our chief technical officer, who's like second to Steve Jobs in the company. And I'm walking through all of these options and possibilities. And I remember him very vividly saying, "You don't seem very excited about any of these." And that was pretty insightful, because I was a little nervous. I was speaking to this guy who's like the top guy in the company. And I'm trying to do the right thing, as a manager, as an employee. I'm walking through methodically all the things they teach you to do. And he kind of just stopped for a second. I'm just so thankful for him. And he said, "I feel like you got something else that you're not telling me." And I said, "Well, I do, but it's kind of crazy. And I don't know if you want to do it." And he says, "Well, just give it to me. What is it?" And I said, "We really should not just solve the problem of a screen reader. We should really solve the sort of business problem of why accessibility isn't more available and isn't more cost effective." And I said, "We should build it in, and we should just give it away. And it should get the same love and care and treatment and quality that we give everything else in this company. And it should be on everything we make, always and forever." And I said, "I know that sounds crazy, because we're not going to make money at this." It's little did I know later that would not be the case, but we're not going to charge for it. And I thought, but that's, and he could tell I was getting excited even as I was describing it. And he said, "You know what? That's something I can sell to Steve. If we can actually change the way this is done in the industry and be a model, that's worth doing. And those are the kinds of things we want to be doing. And that's worthwhile." So I got a huge lesson personally to really go with your passion and go for the crazy thing, because that's usually the thing that's attractive, especially for people at that level who are not looking for small things. They're looking for huge things. And that was the huge idea, was to change the industry and change the sort of example that we could set as a company. At that time, Apple, of course, and perhaps even still today, one of the giant leaders in the industry, and people tend to follow what they do. So for me, that's maybe the proud moment that we actually accomplished what we thought we could do, which was to change things. And of course, when you look back on it, that's what Apple was all about. It was about changing things, right? That was their motto. Yeah. And so it was a perfect fit. But a good personal lesson, a great way to get this started. And of course, unbeknownst to me at that time, they said, "Well, great, go do it." I'm like, "Wait, what? Me? You want me to go do that?" And so it came to me. And of course, I mean, I'm a computer science major. I'm a great employee. I'm doing all these great things, but I didn't have a background in accessibility. And so it was really incumbent on me now to go back and really engage with the blind community and figure out, okay, how do we do this? And how do we do this in a way that's respectable and good and it's going to work and that people are going to love? So it was a quite interesting start.
So let me just stop you there, because honestly, that alone is something this is a story I've never heard before. And I didn't realize all this was going on, because I think, like I say, there were a lot of myths flying around, stories flying around as to why. I wouldn't say people taking claim necessarily, just the myth was kind of coming out of stories that had emerged. But essentially, you were tasked with finding a solution to this, but you thought in yourself, look, actually, if we just build this in and make it part of the business, but you're thinking, well, hang on, why would they go for this? You know, they're not charging for it. We're not going to make money off it. What's the benefit here? But actually, this is something that could be built in and do genuine good and be great. Now, when you did that, when you put that forward, the next step, of course, as you say, was for Steve Jobs to hear about this. Do you know what the reaction was from Steve?
I didn't hear at the time. I certainly got the yes, go do it from the chief technical officer. What I connected later in the years after, and I was at Apple for many years after that, so I kind of started to get more of the story. Things that you can imagine at Apple are pretty secret. You don't always hear exactly what goes on, even if you work there. But it clicked later that, you know what? Apple has a really long history in accessibility that started decades before I got there. And I can remember when I first got to Apple in 1994, which tells you how old I am. It was pretty famous. The Worldwide Disability Solutions Group, led by Alan Brightman. But it has sort of faded out as Apple faded out. I mean, as I mentioned, Apple was going broke. And so it was sort of dropping a lot of things that it needed to do and should have been doing, but just couldn't. And so by the time I got there, it had been kind of a 10-year lapse where just there wasn't much happening there. And so it connected later that, you know what, Steve, when he was first at Apple, had already been through this conversation. It's important. And I think, as Alan has told me the story, he is like, if we're making computers for the rest of us, why aren't we making computers for all of us?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so Steve had already sort of mentally locked in on this a long time earlier. Effectively, my sense of it is when we came back to him, he was like, yeah, that's right. We probably should do that again. That's what we used to do. We're in a place now where we have the resources to be able to do it. Let's jump back in. And of course, we had to show it to him and demonstrate it to him, and he loved it, and off we went.
Wow. So you get the green light, and where do you even start? I mean, you, as you mentioned, you didn't really have any background in accessibility. How did you know which direction to go?
Oh my goodness. I ran through the company trying to find out, is there anybody anywhere that knows anything about any of this? And I found, and I don't know, there might've been more, but I couldn't find them. But I found one lady who used to be a special education teacher in the US and understood this community and had been effectively keeping the candle lit on this topic for years and years, trying to get the company to kind of come back and do this. She was absolutely, her name was Mary Beth Janes, and she was a doll. She was amazing. And so she said, I just said, I need to learn everything you know. I'm going to listen and ask questions. And she said, I'm going to introduce you to everybody you need to meet. And so that's how I got engaged in the disability world, in the vision loss community. She introduced me to the CSUN conference in Southern California. What is it? It has such a long name. The Conference on Technology and People with Disabilities, I think it's called, sponsored by the Cal State University of Northridge, which is where it gets its CSUN name. Yeah. But really just listening and just trying to meet people and ask. And I remember vividly going back to my vice president now of my division saying, okay, I got this assignment. You know, Steve wants me to do this. Everybody's lined up. I said, but I need 3 things that we've never done before. And I'm just going to ask you. And at that point, I'm getting bold because I'm thinking, well, I learned my lesson from the chief technical officer, go big, right?
Yeah.
And so I said, okay, here's the thing. I said, we're going to build this, but we're going to build it on the next OS, right? It's going to be part of the operating system, but we haven't even announced it yet. The world doesn't even know we're building one. I mean, clearly they know that something's coming someday, but this is not how Apple works. We wait until it's out. And I said, so I need you to, because of this blind community, I need you to pre-announce a year in advance that we're building the next operating system and what it's going to be called. And then I need you to allow me to do an open public beta, which we call the spoken interface beta, so I can get people to give me feedback, because there's not enough people in the company to actually get this. And it needs to be global, by the way. And then on top of that, I need you to allow me to ship the next generation code so that I can send out the beta software running on the next OS so people can actually give us the feedback. And I remember even this, I'm thinking, there is not a chance this is going to happen. Like, I don't even think Apple's ever done it since. Maybe I don't think so. And to my utter dismay, he said, yes. And I quickly said, thank you, and got out of the room as fast as I could because
What have I done?
I didn't want it to go to be no at some point. I just thought, that's a miracle. Really, it's a miracle. And so that's how it had. And I could tell, obviously, there was support to do this, but these were big asks. These were things that had really never happened. And so we did this spoken interface beta. It was global. I actually led the feedback group. So when people wrote and asked questions or posted, and remember, this is way before social media. So it was literally like a mailing list. But I would hear every single comment and respond to everything that was there. And so I had a really good sense of what people were questioning and what they didn't like and what they did like. And is it going to be like JAWS and other screen readers, or is it going to be completely different? And I think one of the big, and we can talk more about this some other time, but the big question is how is a Mac different than a Windows PC? Because the world had never actually experienced Mac OS 10 before as a blind person.
Yeah.
They didn't know that the apps kind of show up differently and the menu bar is not in the same place and the cursor lands in between characters, not under a character. And there were a bunch of nuances there that people had, it's broken. I'm like, it's not broken. That's how a Mac works. How could it be different? How could it be different than Windows? Yeah. And so there was another layer of complexity here explaining that this was going to shine, shine a spotlight effectively as a metaphor, but just demonstrate that computers aren't all the same. And so it was a double problem. It was introducing people to a new screen reader, but also to a new operating system. And that was something that community never had to do before. So it was quite interesting.
I think we need to remember that name. Was it Mary Beth James? I mean,
Mary Beth James,
unsung hero, right?
Yes, there's always people behind the scenes, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Well, it's absolutely. I mean, it's always people who you, like you say, people who are just part of the journey, but informed you greatly about how to get this thing out there, how to make it happen.
Yeah. Yeah, the people I met and what I learned along the way, I think I was sort of surprised at myself for not previously having known all about this and having dived in. As a product manager, especially at Apple, you kind of pride yourself on really being in the know and understanding technology and understanding people and figuring all these things out. And this was a completely and utterly new world. And I have to say, I appreciated the fact that I was welcome to it. Because if I hadn't been, I would have got it wrong, or we might not have done it, or we might have walked away. I don't know, but
if you hadn't had that conversation,
that's right.
If you even in that moment decided I'm going to park this idea because I don't think they're going to buy it,
right?
It may never have come to that. It may have been a third-party app. It may have been something you built, you charged for. It could have been anything, but it might not have been what it is today.
Yeah. And I think the idea was people who may be going blind or aren't blind yet might need it in the future, and they don't know they're going to need it, but the product they already bought has it. And so now literally tens of millions of products on the planet, maybe hundreds of millions at this point, have this technology built in. So if you don't use it yourself, you could recommend it to somebody. If you wanted to teach it to someone, if you're sighted, you could learn how to use it and teach somebody. People who are going blind or are blind don't have to go and do something different. They can just use the thing they already have and continue to use it.
It's the conversation. Powerful. It's the conversation I've had so many. I'm sure you're the same, Shaun. The amount of times when people say to me, "What's that? Why is your phone talking?" and I explain it to them, and they say, "Oh, that's interesting." So is that like an add-on that you buy? Is it like a bolt-on?
Do you buy that from the blind shop?
That's right. Yeah. Do you go to you go to get this brick that you plug into the bottom of this? No, it's built into every iPhone, iPad, Mac, watch, everything. And they're just amazed. And of course, let's not forget it's an Android as well now, which, I think a lot of the influence came from Apple. Ultimately, Apple led the way on this, without a doubt.
Yeah.
Oh, I think so, definitely. I mean, I'm interested in you mentioned the community, the blind community, and the feedback and the beta testing. Was there some route that you were going down when you were creating the screen reader that actually the community said no? That's not the way to go about it. You mentioned, how you were learning along the way as well. Was there anything that you really took from the community when it came to the feedback?
Pretty much everything.
Okay.
Yeah, I was really specific about not sort of trying to figure out what the other screen readers were doing and copy it. I really wanted to do this from the foundation, and so it was a matter of saying, let's just start with a clean sheet and figure out how should it work, what should it be, what features did people want. Of course, we were building this from scratch, so we couldn't be great. And I'm sure people forget, but the first version was good, but it wasn't great. The second version on the Mac was better, but it wasn't great. It took, about 3 iterations, and I had sort of a 5-year plan mapped out of how we would implement each new feature and introduce this to people. And then, of course, I think my secret plan was to really have it done in about 3 years, which I think we accomplished. And that allowed us, by the way, to get to the phone, which was another project that kind of took us over. But yeah, I worked with disability organizations, like formal organizations in the U.S., American Foundation for the Blind and National Federation of the Blind, and California Schools of the Blind. There were a bunch of different organizations, but that spoken interface sort of beta group of people was amazing because it was really free flowing. And it was interesting to see how each of the people participating moderated that group themselves. So when somebody said, this is terrible, it's awful, it's going to be, someone saying, well, wait, like give them a chance. Let's see what they say. Let's find out how this is going to go. Maybe they'll put this in the release of the beta software. And because it was open to anybody who wanted to join, we were getting opinions from all over the planet. We were getting opinions from Europe. We're getting opinions from Asia. We're getting opinions from Australia, US, Canada, like everywhere. And that helped moderate some of what we were doing. And it helped us to think through already, how do we do this in multiple languages, even though we weren't prepared to do that with the voice. And of course, out of that came the Alex voice, which people had never heard before. It actually breathes as it talks, which was cool.
Oh, yes.
It sped up and it slowed down. It was human-based, but it sort of worked like a synthetic voice. And so we were developing that technology at the same time, and that was a breakthrough as well. And then eventually, of course, we got all the other languages going. So the feedback was literally from everywhere. And it was, I appreciated that people were honest about that and didn't hold back. Like, trust me, they had opinions. This in the blind community, everybody's got a strong opinion. And I loved that. That was great.
I have to ask though about, you mentioned Alex. Where did Bubbles come from? That's the question I have.
Oh, I don't know. Maybe somebody had a bad meal the night before and thought that was pretty funny. I did like that Apple had a sense of humor, right? I mean, there were a lot of really kind of funny, crazy things in there that were great.
Well, I tell the story on air quite often about my wife and I, not at the time, obviously, but as kids, both sitting in the visual impairment unit at school, making our power books say bad words using these voices like Bubbles and Kathy and Junior and all those other ones. Going right back in the day.
He still does that today.
Oh, yeah, I still do it today. Yeah.
And that's what we had in mind. We invented VoiceOver. We wanted people to be able to say bad words they couldn't say themselves.
I know. It's like as a kid, you might look up a dictionary for a bad word. Well, we just made them say bad words. That's how.
Made them up. Yeah.
I didn't know what the bad words were, mind you, but we did it anyway. And it's such an incredible topic because you, in a way, it kind of. I suppose we look at it inside the bubble, but I imagine someone like Steve Jobs looking at this and thinking, we've just built an operating system to encourage people to use a mouse to get away from the keyboard, and now we're building this thing that takes them back to the keyboard, right? It was like kind of almost going back to basics in some ways.
It's interesting you frame it that way because I don't think that really came to mind as I talked to him or as he talked to me or as we talked about the project. And in fact, when you think about we call them commanders now in the Mac. You have the keyboard commander, the numpad commander, the trackpad commander, and all these different things. We were thinking really hard about the fact that people would use it in multiple different ways that could adapt to them, not make them adapt to the way it was designed to work. And so even at the very beginning, we're thinking, well, if you want to use a mouse, it turns out there's actually a feature in, I think, the original version that allowed the cursor to follow the mouse. So if you had residual vision, you could use the mouse and still use VoiceOver.
Yeah.
And I think one of the other interesting things that doesn't get a lot of notice is we designed VoiceOver to be very visual. And that was conscious effort. That was something I wanted to make sure we did because I recognized at the time we didn't want to create a tool for the blind that only the blind could use because that, again, separates people. It doesn't make it an inclusive experience. And we knew at home, sighted parents helping blind children, teachers helping blind students, people at work working with colleagues who were sighted, there needed to be a visual so that the person who was working with someone else who was sighted, they could join in and it could be an inclusive experience for both of them at the same time on the same computer using the same tool. And so that's why we had things like the Braille panel and the caption panel and the visual cursor and the magnified cursor and all these kind of amazing things that were in there. And people kept asking me, why are you doing all these engineering efforts to build all these visual things? I'm like, you don't understand this culture. You don't understand what the problem is. The problem for blind people is the tool, yes, but it's really not. It's being included. It's being part of what's going on. It's having a voice. It's being able to be the lead, not the follower. And so building the tools and having that sort of frame of mind as we were designing this tool was really critical. And I think people, whether they understood that concept explicitly or not, really reacted to that. Because then I could go to a school and demonstrate it visually to people who are buying computers for that school. Or I could go to an organization and say, you just buy the same Mac and it'll work for everybody in your company. You can hire people who are blind. You don't have to do anything special or extra. It's just all going to work. How are they going to work together? Oh, we've got that covered. And so there were some really interesting sort of thoughts behind how we designed that product to make it inclusive.
Zooming forward a little bit, because we could talk to you all day about Apple, and you must come back again.
I would love to talk to you all day about this. Maybe we should have a whole series. I don't know.
We should, because honestly, I think I'd even like to put this idea to you live on air. Why not? That we get you back. We do a bit of a Q&A with our audience, because there's a lot of questions I'm sure our audience might have about the origins of VoiceOver, what your thoughts are on it today in comparison, and all of that. I'm sure there'll be lots of interesting questions. So if you'd be up for that, we'd love to get you back to talk.
That would be really fun.
Subject. But I don't want to limit our time here, because we've got the hour. But I do want to ask you about Facebook, because you moved on, and more recently, Facebook has been your job, head of accessibility there. You left there, and you're now at Be My Eyes, and we'll get to that in a moment as well. But it's an interesting job title for us, if I'm honest, because head of accessibility at Facebook. There are some blind people. I'm going to say it. Some blind people amongst us who might go, there's an accessibility team at Facebook, because sometimes we've used the Facebook app. We might have had a few issues, we might have had a few challenges along the way. Right. We think about other products that have been made by Meta generally. So what was the role there? What did you do there, and how did you influence Facebook and Meta more generally?
Yeah, so I appreciate you bringing up the word Meta, because Meta really encompasses all of the products that are made by that company, including WhatsApp and Instagram and Facebook and Reality Labs, Oculus headsets, and the glasses which you're wearing. Thank you for that. the Ray-Ban Meta glasses. Very cool. I noticed that. And so it's a large job, right? You've got to be able to cover a lot of ground, whether it's hardware devices or software devices or applications or services, those kinds of things. The head of accessibility at any company is a tough job, because you're trying to not only sort of ensure that the products you're shipping today are accessible, but you're also trying to make sure the people on the team are getting better and more engaged with the community, that they're not losing track of that. They're not becoming insulated. You're trying to make sure that you're sharing the message of what we're doing out to the different audiences, and that's difficult to do with a flat marketing budget. You're trying to figure out what the technology is going to be in 2 and 3 and 5 years, and figure out like, how do we design products for that. We're also watching on the regulations and all of the different technological changes, the competition. There's so much involved in a job like that. At Meta, effectively, it was really just to accelerate things. They'd already had an accessibility team and a program. And it was just to try to figure out like, how could we move things faster along. And I think the way I'll sort of summarize this is, a lot of people were doing a lot of work, but it's a massive company. And to give you a sense of the scale, because I think even when I joined the company, I didn't fully appreciate this. They serve over 3 billion people on the planet every day.
Wow.
Through some product or service. There's about 8 billion people on the planet.
Yeah.
Right? And they don't operate in China, so take 1 billion out.
Yeah.
So literally one company, and I don't care how big that company is serving effectively half the planet. And when you start to think in those terms, you realize, wow, like scale has a completely different meaning. And so it's not a matter of sort of manually saying, well, go get the app and sit down with an engineer and look at the thing and fix it. That's not how it's built. It's literally built through a chain of tools that at the end, it's like a production line. At the end, if you were an automobile company, a car comes out. But at the beginning, it looks like raw steel and rubber and glass and who knows what else. And you think, how is that ever going to be a car at the end? But everybody puts their thing in, and pretty soon you have this beautiful thing at the end. And that's kind of how things are built at Meta. It's like you start with a bunch of code, and the code gets modified and designs get added, and it kind of goes through this chain of tools, and out the other side comes a thing. So it was more about, how do we affect the tool chain, and how do we get the inputs right? And one of the things that they were struggling with, as many companies do, probably literally the entire industry, how do we measure this? Like, how do we know if it's accessible? And I remember asking the question, I said, tell me if that app's accessible. And they said, well, it is sort of. Okay, what do you mean sort of? Well, for someone who's blind, it's great, but for someone with hearing loss, it doesn't work at all. Okay, so is that accessible or not accessible? And so there's nuance and there's specificity that you have to get to. And the tools and the way things were being measured in the industry didn't really account for that. They're like, that thing's missing a label. Okay, so is that bad or good? Well, the label's on a cosmetic image that doesn't really matter to the user experience, so it's okay to be missing. But there's a missing label over here. that's really critical. Like you can't, enter the answer or click yes on the form. So it's the same problem, but it has two completely different impacts. And so the time that I spent there effectively was figuring out how do we build this system, this measurement tool, so that anybody in the company, whether they know about accessibility or not, could find the problem and know who it affects and how badly it affects them. And then prioritize that fix so it got done sooner, so that we could make progress faster and scale this quickly. And so it was really, like, I was there about 4 years. It was a 4-year effort. And just as I was leaving, it was all kind of coming together and the tool was cranking up and they were starting to do more of this testing and apply this across the company. That was while we were also, of course, making fixes and building things. And of course, things like the Ray-Ban Meta glasses that you're sporting today. We were working with that team to build accessibility into that product. At the same time, we were doing this other work as well. So you kind of have a foot in a couple of different places. You're trying to pick up the pieces from the past. You're trying to make sure that today is working great and the future is in a good place.
It's never ending though, right? Can you ever...
Never ending.
We've talked about things being described as fully accessible before, but you bring it up yourself. Absolutely right. Yeah, it may be accessible for screen reader users, but for people with other difficulties, it absolutely is not.
Right.
But you can never... I don't think you ever come to a point where you say, okay, we've cracked it. Now everything is fully accessible, right? It's going to be an evolving thing.
Yeah. And so a couple of things that were interesting there. Facebook Meta was famous for creating something called automatic alt text. This is years ago. It was taking artificial intelligence and computer vision and applying it to images to auto-generate descriptions.
Yeah.
And you think, well, maybe they weren't so good. Well, they're good now. At the time, AI was still young and it was still trying to figure it out. But imagine, because I'm thinking, well, just get a bunch of people and you can describe, thousands and thousands of images. The problem is it's not thousands of images. At Facebook, it's tens of billions of images. There aren't enough people on the planet. If you had every person on the planet working on this, you couldn't keep up with it. And when you're faced with that problem, you realize really quickly, this is not a brute force problem. You can't just try harder. You literally are forced to use tools and really be strategic. And so we created this application of AI that now seems pretty standard. Like a lot of companies do this, and we get these sort of auto-generated descriptions, but we also want to make sure people knew when they were auto-generated versus human-generated. So we had to label them and describe them so people would know, like, how trustworthy is it, how accurate might it be, and where did it come from? And so that's how you get tens of billions of images described when you need them on the fly as they're requested, as opposed to just doing it for everything and then nobody looks at the image and nobody cares. Like, you've wasted all that time and effort. Yeah. So again, you got to be really smart to think about, like, how do you apply this at that kind of crazy global scale? Another thing that we did, just in passing, but I think it's useful, is, and I understand that we're talking about blindness and vision loss, but one of the huge efforts we made was captioning video. Also using artificial intelligence. And we went from, tens of thousands of videos to literally hundreds of billions of videos that now have captions for people who are deaf or hard of hearing. That's at scale, and that is massive. And that's not something that some people in this audience may care and some people may not, but that's a huge effort. And that was some of the other work that was going on there at the same time. So there were a lot of projects going on.
One thing, I don't know if you can comment on this, but I know it's been in the, let's just say, the blind headlines, as I call it, which is Facebook, funnily enough to me. I go through my Facebook feed, I look at the different groups and I see what people are talking about. And one thing that a lot of people were kind of upset about was the mobile site going away recently. So that was one route where I think a lot of blind people, I used it a few occasions. I didn't realize it was even still there till it was talked about. But ultimately, a lot of people were using it to navigate Facebook because it was the more accessible route. From your knowledge, leaving recently, has a lot of work been done to make the website, the app, everything else more accessible? Is that just, as you say, a work that's continually ongoing? Yeah,
that's a great question. And it was on my watch. So, and now that I'm gone, I could probably talk about it a little more than I could have maybe a year ago. So there was something called the mobile or M.dot site for Facebook, which was a radically simplified version of the Facebook experience that lacked a lot of the new features that was built a long time ago. And unfortunately, because it was built a long time ago, security wasn't sort of as intense as it needed to be. And as we kind of got in there, we started to understand that it was not a site that made sense for us to continue. We couldn't revamp it, and we couldn't make it as secure as it needed to be. And of course, you could probably well aware of some of the security issues and privacy issues around Facebook products and things. And they take it really, really seriously. And so the decision was made, instead of investing in that, why don't we make the full version of the Facebook mobile app more accessible, like fully accessible? And so we literally went through a complete rewrite of the Facebook. Sorry, I said app. I meant website. We went through a complete rewrite from top to bottom of the Facebook website, the technology. And imagine going back through years and years and years of code and basically throwing it all away and starting over and rebuilding it without anybody noticing. Like, it should just be like, it just keeps working. But what that did is, and this is why, again, having an accessibility team at that time was so critical, because we could go to that team and say, as we're re-architecting this, let's re-architect so that accessibility is easier to do as we move forward. And that's exactly what happened. And so all of the stuff that was preventing accessibility from happening went away. And we had a new modern foundation that enabled massive leaps forward in accessibility, which is what people experienced when they got the new version. So when we rolled out that new one, accessibility took a huge leap forward. And of course, it's been progressing rapidly ever since, because now all the effort is in just adding the new accessibility, not trying to fix the broken pieces underneath that was causing us not to get there. So the amount of effort now is going to the right things. So that's what happened in that case. And we had lots of discussions about how do we make it an easier experience and how do we make it a more useful experience. And we had some trade-offs, honestly, where it's probably a little more complicated, but it's also way more accessible. We felt in the long run, giving people more access to more functions and features, again, that was more inclusive and equivalent to what everyone else in the world got, was the right direction to go. And that would allow people to choose whether they want to use those features or not, as opposed to not giving them that choice.
Well, I've got to say, I'm imagining you were a big part of this as well, but, WhatsApp became incredibly accessible on the PC. It's possibly in the best state, but I will say on the Mac even now, I find with Windows spots, hallelujah to Windows spots. Did you create Windows spots? Because I like Windows spots. I like them a lot. And, that's just improved over time. And, on the Mac, you can use them to navigate between the various sections, which is great. And, I love that. So, it's really good to see that kind of development going on. But let's move on, because you've moved away from Facebook and you've moved in with Mike Buckley. I don't think you've literally.
No.
I don't think he's behind you over there, is it? No, it's not that one house that you're all just in. But,
figuratively.
But, you're there at Be My Eyes. What are you doing at Be My Eyes?
Yeah, well, I ran into a couple of just amazing projects along the way. As you're kind of purveying the field of accessibility and the latest innovations and things, obviously I had some real interest in artificial intelligence. And I had been working with the Reality Labs division of Meta, working on these Ray-Ban Meta glasses. And so I knew those were coming out. And we were talking about, like, what could we do here that could be really innovative? And the idea of having a hands-free wearable object that was accessible was really compelling. And so as I left Meta, I actually thought I might just retire. But of course, Mike Buckley reached out and said, hey, you got some time on your hands. Maybe you could come follow up on this. And it just really intrigued me. So I thought, yeah, you know what? Maybe I could help out here. And so they asked me to be the product and marketing strategist for Be My Eyes, which I'm now doing and excited about. And we're trying to figure out how to create just a really extraordinary experience for people. One of the things we've heard from so many people is, I love my phone, I love VoiceOver, and I even love Be My Eyes. But if I'm using a cane and I'm carrying a bag or I'm holding the hand of my child walking across the street or whatever it is, I have no hands left. Like, I can't do the thing I need to do on my phone. And so having the idea of a wearable experience that was hands-free was really compelling. And I think it's going to change the game for a lot of people where, for example, these glasses, people who don't know, have a camera built in and a microphone and a speaker and are connected to the internet. And so wherever you point your head, if you ask it, it can take a picture or a video of what's in front of you. And through Be My Eyes as a service, you can ask, what is it? And you can get a description either from a volunteer or from AI. And again, just by talking and using your voice. So that's going to be the thing that's incredible about that. Not only is it hands-free, but it's in the moment. You're not fumbling to take out your phone and do your password or unlock the phone and then get to the camera app and then launch the thing. And, well, that moment came and went. I lost it.
Yeah.
Something runs by you, it's just gone. And so the fact that you can do it sort of in the moment, instantly, when you need it, as you need it, is compelling. And we've built in, again, for people who don't know, there's actually like an LED light in the upper corner of the glasses, kind of where the hinge would be for the glasses. so that if it's active, it signals to people around you that it is active, like a camera is working or you're taking a picture. And even in the packaging, there's a little note that sort of says, hey, be good, be smart, be nice, be courteous. If you're going to record or take a picture, ask people. Just say, hey, is it okay if I do this right now? Is it okay if I ask for assistance here? If there's someone around you that might be impacted and doesn't want to be on camera or be in that image. So we're trying to create a social etiquette around this that we hope is really positive and really good for people. And I think most people, if you were blind and were using this device, would grant you that. They're like, sure, yeah, no problem, I get it. You need that, that's great. But we also want to create that etiquette so that it becomes normal and it's okay, and people encourage that use rather than oppose it.
Did you just give us an exclusive there, Mike?
I don't think so.
Because Be My Eyes have announced that the human volunteer service is coming to the Meta Ray-Bans, but when it comes to the Meta AI aspect of using Meta Ray-Bans to take a picture and then get that artificial intelligence description, is that coming anytime soon?
I'll have to take a drink of my my coffee here.
Well, hang on. Are you talking about Meta AI or Be My AI? Because I think that's what Sean's getting mixed up with.
Be my AI.
Right, right. So, but we kind of knew, right? We know Mike Buckley has mentioned this as well. That, come on, Sean. If you listen to these interviews, you would hear these things.
I am here. I am listening.
You're listening way too well. Is the problem?
Not enough. But no, I mean, we know Be My Eye is going to come down the line eventually. That's, I would imagine, the long-term aim here. But there's a lot of work to be done in that process, and we know that because the work is ongoing. The work is ongoing to get Be My Eyes on.
I think Mike said it's done and ready to roll out.
Oh, okay, fine, we'll go with it. But no, I find it interesting because you're linking this together, right? You're bringing the Facebook and you're bringing the Be My Eyes together in this way, from your experience, but also into Be My Eyes, which is absolutely amazing. The question for today's audience, though, and I'm hearing this a lot, is people, and I know you're kind of having to answer this question almost with a foot in both camps, but I have to ask you this but I get it a lot from people to say, okay, so, you guys here at Double Tap have been talking about Meta Ray-Bans for months on end. You've been buying them. I bought 2 pairs. That's how much I like them.
Yes.
And the dog chewed up the first pair.
The dog liked the first pair.
The dog loved them more than I did.
Why do dogs love? That's a question we really should stop to ask ourselves.
I know.
Why do dogs love glasses? I don't understand it.
Expensive glasses. That's the key, right?
Yeah,
don't
usually
touch
the
other
most expensive ones. The ones you need the most, of course.
If I bought them for £1 out of a shop, they wouldn't touch them. But so the dog chewed up the first pair. I bought the second pair, and I'm getting the same experience others are getting who are starting to access this Meta AI, which is, it's not like Be My AI. It's not like Seeing AI. It's not like Envision. It's not like, it's not built for blind people ultimately. So things like reading menus, getting information. Someone was telling me the other day they were standing in front of a sign. They were with a sighted person. They knew the sign had writing on it, and it couldn't even really understand the sign. It kind of said, it may be this or it may be that. It feels like Meta AI is very young. And it's clearly not built for blind people. That's not built that way. It's built for the mainstream audience. So there's a little bit of a challenge there at the moment for those who are getting that first impression of Meta AI. I'm guessing you hope that Be My AI will resolve that for blind people. But do you know that Meta AI will improve, right?
Of course. AI is improving in leaps and bounds. It's the I have to say, in all the decades I've been doing this, at least 3 to 4 decades now, since I was 20, I'm 61. I have never experienced a technology moving as quickly as AI. Mm-hmm. Like, I am literally flabbergasted every time I read about an innovation or an improvement. It is shocking to me as a technologist who's pretty jaded. Like, I know how things move, and I live in Silicon Valley, and things are fast, and we can kind of go, yeah, of course, but this is something completely different. Yeah. And so when you say, is AI going to get better, whether it's Meta's or Be My Eyes or whoever, it is the speed at which this is moving is absolutely extraordinary.
And the measurement we're using here is ultimately OpenAI, right? ChatGPT has been such a phenomenal product at the beginning and kind of hit the ground running, got going, and it feels like it's in the lead. We know this is a race. We know others will catch up. We know Google has improved immensely since, the early days of Bard, when, frankly, you would rather use anything else but. And now, Gemini is improving. Apple Intelligence, and then you've got Meta AI.
Yet to be seen. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, coming soon in various areas. Yeah, but I mean, it's clear it's going to improve. But the problem is that we're starting to see the potential on other products, and we're kind of rushing. And also, let's be honest about it, blind people are getting the examples of seeing AI and like say, Be My AI. They just want that experience built into the glasses. That's ultimately it, right? But what I guess I'm asking you is, can mainstream AI ever deliver that?
Well, I think that's the question. And it's certainly where Be My Eyes can be incredibly useful, because we have a foot in both worlds. We can understand the technology and the AI and where it's going and what's happening there, and also understand this community in a really deep way. I mean, Be My Eyes is so deeply ingrained in the blind community, and try and figure out, like, how do we ensure, we talk about this a lot, is how do we ensure that whatever AI might come in the future is tuned and going to be a great experience for people who are blind and low vision. And so that's one of the value adds we can bring to this conversation, whether it's something that we help other companies with or license ourselves or develop ourselves. I don't know like where that goes, but that's the unique spot that we take in this space. And I think what we can do to ensure that that's a great experience. Hey, I wanted to go back just for a moment here too, because I think we kind of rushed past it. You said something really, really interesting, but
I think we could stop there, to be honest. That's incredible in itself.
I said something interesting. I got out of this conversation. There was one really interesting moment there. But like, I think we don't want to lose track of this. It's the fact that this is being built into some of the world's most famous general purpose commercial products for everyone that also work for people who are blind. Now, where have you heard that before? Putting VoiceOver on a Mac, putting VoiceOver on a phone, making things available. So, for example, like instead of spending perhaps $3,000, I'll use US, these glasses are about $300. They're not much more than the glasses just cost. They're available at any retail store that carries the Ray-Ban product, which is a world famous brand. If your dog eats them, you can just go to the store and get a new pair. You can order them online.
Yeah, tell me about it.
It's not like you have to go to the blind shop, right? And so we've become so accustomed to buying general purpose things that work. This is the change over the last 10 years that I think VoiceOver started, which is that you should be able to buy a general purpose product that's low cost, it's widely available, it's easy to use, that everyone has, and be able to use it too. That's capital I inclusion. That's what we want. And so for these Ray-Ban Meta glasses, it's so important that they're cost effective, like people can afford them, that they're widely available, that you can ask questions from somebody who might be able to use them and help you out, or you can help them use them if you want to. I think that's a really critical thing not to overlook.
Yeah,
because we can build technologies for blind people that cost $10,000 that only they can use, but no one can afford. And they could be amazing.
Absolutely.
Does that really change people's lives? I don't know. This does.
I talk about this, Mike, on the show every day. I get emails about it from people who are in that traditional way of thinking, in the blind community especially, those who say I'm wrong and that specialist is necessary. I say, the very reason I started this show, and it may well be the case that you are personally responsible for my career. So everyone can blame Mike Shebanek from here on in.
Dare you, Mike.
Don't
But,
put that on me.
It's on you. Because, I started these shows based on the idea that we wanted to talk about mainstream technology that we could use as blind people. We didn't have to go and buy the blind box. We could go and buy something from a shelf that everyone else could buy. And the iPhone really started that conversation for us. I started doing the show back in, 2012 or 2013, whatever it was. That was around about the time we were seeing the development of the iPhone with VoiceOver becoming a real option for us. I remember when the iPhone came out. I remember when I saw it, I was excited by it. And like a lot of blind people, we kind of paused for a second and thought, this is not going to be for us. This is a slab of glass with a button on it. How are we going to use this? And we knew instinctively, blind people, I'm not saying we're ahead of it, but we're always a little bit more ahead of the curve when it comes to technology, because we need to be. We need to be aware of what's going on. We need to be at the forefront, because we cannot allow ourselves to fall behind. Or we could end up out of a job, or we could end up. I had that experience in 2017 when I lost more vision. I had to learn how to use a screen reader very quickly, or else I was going to be out of a job. So, we have to be ahead of the curve. We have to know this stuff. And for me, the iPhone represented the future of where technology was going, and it was going to be a future without blind people, because it just wasn't going to be possible for us to use that. And then when the iPhone came along and VoiceOver, I remember a good friend of ours of the show, Shelley Brisbane, created a documentary called 36 Seconds that changed everything. And it was literally the 36 seconds that VoiceOver got a mention on the stage during a presentation.
Wow.
It just blew us all away. And it was only 36 seconds, but by God, it changed the world for us blind people.
It did.
You can only imagine when I was in the lab and the engineers and I were talking about this, and we kind of, at the time it seemed impossible. It was literally like going to the moon. Like, it can't really happen. We can dream about it. We can try to do this, but there's just too many things in the way, and it had never really been done before.
Mm-hmm.
And so breaking new ground like that was clearly really exciting for us. And to actually get my hands the very first time on the kind of what now as VoiceOver was just, and I can remember going home from work that day thinking, oh my gosh, this is going to be amazing. I couldn't wait to deliver it. And then I felt the pressure to not screw it up. Like, how do I tell people about this and not get it wrong and make sure people understand why it's going to be great or how they're going to use it? Remember, nobody had ever used an iPhone in the blind community. And most everyone who had ever tried to use a touchscreen had a terrible, horrible experience.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
And I'm thinking, as the marketing guy, now how am I going to get people to want to use this? And that's a whole story in itself. But thank God there was a man named Darren Burton who I had called up, who's blind, worked for the AFB as a consulting director. And I asked him to come, basically not telling him anything, just said, could you come to Cupertino? And I have something I want to tell you. And he got on a plane. I couldn't believe it. He got on a plane, flew across the country, came to Cupertino, spent an afternoon. I said, I'm about to demonstrate for you something you've never experienced before. He was the first person outside the company who was blind, who was using this device. And it was an amazing experience for him, for me. We both know each other now well and have kept in touch, but that's how it that's how we knew. Like, we thought internally, hey, we got this, but you don't know until you ask somebody who's actually blind. And outside and in this case, we had people who were blind in the company, but we need somebody outside the company who'd never used a phone before. And I can remember the great story he told me. He said, we did this demo. It worked great. He goes, and I remember I gave it to him. I said, take it home and go do it yourself. Now you know how to use it. Just take it home and try this. Wow. And I remember years later, he said, I took it home and I thought for sure, because it just worked too well. He goes, I thought for sure you had somebody in the back of the room I couldn't see that was just making it work.
Controlling it, yeah.
Yeah, remote controlling it. He goes, it was my shock of my life when I took it home and it actually worked the same way it worked at home that it worked in the Cupertino at Apple headquarters. So that was a fun moment for sure. Did
Steve Jobs ever try VoiceOver? Did he ever play? He must have done at some point, right?
Oh yeah, of course. Yeah. We demonstrated it to him, and there's a great story about well, that's maybe for another time. But yes, yeah, for sure. And in fact, I was at a conference. Now if you want,
I'd love to hear it.
Steve Wozniak. Well, I'll tell the Steve Wozniak story. So Steve Wozniak is the other Steve that started Apple back in the early 70s with Steve Jobs. And I was at a conference for education, and we were talking about VoiceOver, and he kind of pulled me aside. And he goes, hey, you're the guy that does VoiceOver. I said, yeah. And he said, hey, my son uses it. I said, oh, I didn't know your son was blind. He goes, no, he's not. I said, well, why is he using it? He goes, oh, in school, when he gets bored and he just can't, take it anymore, he has VoiceOver in his pocket, but he has an earbud in his ear. And so he just navigates the web and plays around on his iPhone during school.
Wow.
Without the teacher or the students knowing. He loves it. And I started laughing. Well, that's not really why we designed it, but I'm glad he likes it. And so that's my Steve Wozniak moment.
Can I just? I know we're short of time, but I just want to ask you one.
Years ago, by the way, that student.
No. Yeah, absolutely. But no, I want to ask you one final question, if I can, because this is kind of there's a million questions I could end with. But I remember the iPod that came out with what essentially was VoiceOver built in. Right, it was the first kind of mainstream version of VoiceOver. Mm-hmm. Was that the idea behind that product? Was that the idea behind building it as well, that you could build this thing and then use VoiceOver in that mainstream way?
Boy, you've asked such a great question. First of all, great memory, because this iPod's kind of come and gone, and most people don't remember it. It's called the iPod Shuffle.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. I'm old.
And this was a great moment, actually, in terms of accessibility. And people ask me all the time, is it worth investing in accessibility? And here's a great example of that. We launched VoiceOver. It's getting to be well-known and well-liked. And the iPod team comes to me and knocks on my door and says, we have a question. What do you need? And I'm thinking, well, okay, what's happening here? They said, we have an idea to build an iPod, the world's most popular music player at the time. But we want to make it so small so people can use it for running, or just, it kind of just has the click controls on it, but no screen. And we don't know how to make it. But we think this is going to be really big. Can we use VoiceOver? Would you allow us to take this assistive technology and make it general purpose? Could we use your name? Could we build VoiceOver into it? Because if we can't make this iPod. And I had a really big decision to make. Do I keep VoiceOver for just this community and keep it an assistive tech, or do I allow this to be a general purpose tool and feature? And it's part of why we named it VoiceOver and not like technology for the blind. Like, we wanted it to be about the product and not about the people using it, so that, again, inclusivity, anybody could use it for whatever reason they wanted to. And so it took me about a half a second to say absolutely 100%. And they're like, oh, this is great. And of course, that enabled Apple to create an entire generation of iPods for the world, who now, by the way, what did they hear? Every person on the planet who bought an iPod, there's VoiceOver in this.
Yeah.
So when a blind person said, I'm using VoiceOver, they're like, oh, that's cool. I use it too.
Yeah.
Talk about inclusivity. Like, that's the golden ticket. That's it.
Yeah.
That's when I realized we've got something here. This is right. We did the right thing the right way. And so it's one of my proud moments, honestly. And many people never ask me about this, but that's what happened behind the scenes. Without assistive tech, without Apple's investment, without the disability world saying, hey, we want to be part of this bigger planet, we wouldn't have made that decision, which enabled the entire planet now to understand what VoiceOver is and does and how it works on a general purpose product that even people who are blind could use. Amazing. Yeah. And that's the magic of assistive tech and these investments these companies make. These payoffs come in places you would never expect, but that's a great example of one.
Wow. Mike,
I don't know where we go from here.
I know, honestly, we could talk all day. This is so interesting. But look, come back soon, because we'd love to talk more. And, of course, the story of AI just rolls on and gathers at a pace, which we want to continue that conversation with you on as well. And, of course, we've been talking a lot with Be My Eyes, but this has just been such a great conversation geeking out with you today. Mike, thanks so much for coming on.
Thank you both. Really appreciate it. Enjoyed it.
Thanks, Mike.
And that's it for today. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you so much for watching on YouTube. We'll be back tomorrow with more Double Tap.